All right, today we're gonna look at Luke chapter 15. And the questions I want us to try to answer as we go through this parable. We're gonna go through it in 3 different sessions. And the first session, we're gonna look at the question, how God reacts to people who can't stand him. Because the questions that is being brought up here is, I think, questions that most people ask, which is, does God really love me? I don't know if you've ever met people who say things like, yeah, I'm pretty sure church is not for me because you don't understand what I've done. I'm pretty sure God can't really forgive me for what I'm doing. I'm pretty sure God doesn't like me at all. And so I think that question has been asked by human beings from the beginning of time. And today we want to try to answer it, not just from theory's point of view, but from Jesus' point of view, because I believe he shared this with us to answer those questions. And so let's read together Luke chapter 15, and we are going to read all the way up till 24. So Luke 15:24, and we are going to read 4 verses each. So we're going to start with Gladdy, and we're just going to kind of go counter circle, 4 verses each.
15:24.
Mm-hmm.
My son was dead, but now.
I'm sorry, Luke 15, verse 1, and we're going to read all the way from 1 to 24, 4 verses each.
Okay. Luke 15, verse 1. The tax collectors and sinners all came to listen to Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law began to complain. Look, this man welcomes sinners and even eats with them. Then Jesus told them the story. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Then he will leave the other 99 sheep in the open field and go out and look for the lost sheep until he finds it.
And when he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders, rejoicing. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, rejoice with me, for I have found my lost sheep, which was lost. I say to you that likewise, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 just persons who need no repentance. Or what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one coin, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it?
And when she finds it, she will call in her friends and neighbors and say, rejoice with me because I have found my lost coin. In the same way, there is joy in the presence of God's angels when even one sinner repents. To illustrate the point further, Jesus told them this story. A man had 2 sons. The younger son told his father, I want my share of your estate now before you die. So his father agreed to divide his wealth between his sons.
A few days later, this younger son packed all his belongings and moved to a distant land where he wasted all his money on wild living. About the time his money ran out, a great famine swept over the land and he began to starve. He persuaded a local farmer to hire him, and the man sent him into the field to feed the pigs. The young man became so hungry that even the pods he was feeding the pigs looked good to him, but no one gave him anything.
When he finally came to his senses, he said to himself, at home, even the hired servants have food enough to spare, and here I am dying of hunger. I will go home to my father and say, Father, I have sinned against both heaven and you, and I am no longer worthy of being called your son. Please take me on as a hired servant. So he returned home to his father, and while he was still a long way off, his father saw him coming, filled with love and compassion. He ran to his son, embraced him, and kissed him.
And the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and in your sight, and am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, bring out the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and sandals on his feet, and bring the fatted calf here and kill it, and let us eat and be merry. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and they began to be merry.
All right. So we begin to see that this question was actually asked by people, maybe not even the usual people who'd be asking that question. What does Jesus think about people who can't stand him? And usually that image is given to what my Bible says, notorious sinners. And the complaint of the Pharisees or the religious people in those days is, why is Jesus always hanging out with sinful people? Now, I don't know what these people did to be called sinful people. Were they murderers? Were they robbers? What exactly did they do to be classified as sinful people? And I don't know what picture you have in your mind as somebody who's sinful. You know, is it people with leather jackets, with rings all over their faces? Is it people with tattoos? You know, is it people who look mean? How do you view people who are sinful? And I think the other question is, how do you view yourself? Because all of this are things that God actually deals with in chapter 15. And so when he tells us this parable, he describes people who can't stand him, or who can't stand him, as people who are lost. And the first parable talks about a sheep who gets lost. Now, as far as we know, sheep don't really know enough to actually plan out their life. Getting lost is just another Tuesday for them. For them, they're just trying to eat, right? They're just trying to enjoy life. I think as human beings, that's kind of what we do as well. We're just trying to live. We're just trying to smile, you know, as much as we can. We want to be happy, but we get to a point where, as a sheep would, he's happy for a while until one day he's like, where is everybody? How did they even get here? And maybe he's not even, he doesn't even realize until he falls into a cliff, or there's this big, huge bear that he sees, and is like, now what do I do? Right? And many times I think people get lost, not because they plan to be lost. That's the thing about being lost. You never start a trip and you say, you know what? I want to be lost. I think I want to just keep going until I'm lost. Lost is something that happens just because, not because you're trying to get there, but you're trying to get to another place altogether where you think you'll be much happier. You're trying to get to a destination where you think this is the best destination for me. And then one day you wake up and you're like, how come I'm not there yet? And even worse, this hurts. Now I don't know how to get back. Now I don't know which way to go. And it says here that when the shepherd, what the shepherd does, because he knows the sheep cannot ever find his way back home, is that he goes out there, finds them. But this is the other thing that this parables tell us, that every time something is found that was lost, there is always celebration. So if we are going to ask God, how do you feel about sinners? How do you feel about people who are lost? I wonder if God would say, try to find them. I want to try to find them because I'm in the mood for a serious party. Now with the lost coin, again, with the lost coin, coins don't know that they're lost. Coins get lost because, not because they wandered away, coins just get lost, not even, and they're satisfied with being lost. Now, we don't want to take this too far, but I think the point that Jesus was making here is there are people who are just really satisfied of being lost. This is why I wouldn't say that they can't stand God, but for the most part, they feel nothing. They're okay without God being in any part of their life. What's interesting, though, is that it says here that the woman who owned this coins searched her whole house. There's this desire that this coin would be found. Now, I don't know if you've ever met coin collectors. First of all, coin collectors, I met one, and his whole job, his whole business is trying to keep coin collectors from getting fake coins. This guy can talk about coins for a week and not stop talking. This is the thing about coin collectors. Their life, if they have a collection of 10 coins, if one goes missing, it's not like they go, I got 9. You know, who cares about one? No, they're not going to sleep. It's going to drive them crazy that somehow their coin collection isn't there. So again, if we're going to ask the question, how does God feel about sinners who are lost? What conclusion would you come up with? The story that we want to focus on today, though, is about two sons who are lost. And this is where I got this title called, How Does God React to People Who Can't Stand Him? Because the son comes to his father one day and basically says, I really wish you were dead. And I don't think it was hatred towards the dad. He's just like, I really want my money, is what he says. I would rather have money than you. Now, I think there are people all over the world today. And maybe some of you who are listening to this, you know people like that, or maybe that person's you. I would rather have anything in the world other than God. That money or relationships or any experience is so much better than God. But in order to get those things, I need to get rid of God first. And what's interesting, when Jesus was sharing this story, I can almost hear a gasp within the crowd, because then the father says, okay. What would get a father to say, all right, I'm going to give you your inheritance? Because what the father had to do was not go to the bank and say, all right, I'm going to divide my bank account in half. That would be easier, although that's pretty hard. I don't know about you, but even with the very little I have in a bank account, dividing it in half and giving it to somebody, it's not an easy thing to do. But this father not only had to go to the bank, he had to sell off land, because that's the way it was back then. Nobody had bank accounts back then. And so when Jesus was talking to these people about a wealthy man, and he now had to sell a land for the inheritance of his son. I don't know about you, but everybody all of a sudden got triggered with all kinds of emotions. Because this is the most ridiculous thing any father would do. And so maybe some of the things we're going to talk about today is, what would get a father to do that? So it says a few days later, after the father sells off his land, and again, Jesus doesn't say this, but I think it's assumed that if you're going to sell your land quickly, you're not going to get top dollar for it. And this isn't about getting top dollar, because the son just wanted to get out. And somehow the father understood that desire that son had and said, all right, I'll let you do that. So he takes all of this money that he got and packed his belongings And the other thing I want us to try to think of is, what was his game plan? What was going on in this son's mind that would say, this is what would make me happy? And according to this story, it's just wild living. I don't know what that means. I think what that means is every time, every waking hour, he's doing exactly what he wanted. I don't know about you, but isn't that what we all want? Isn't it what we want is just the opportunity to do what we want? Because today we're going to also talk about, how does God define sin? Because he doesn't focus on what he does. Now, most people would actually say sin is what you do. There's a list, here's a list, this is sin. If there was that list, none of these parables were actually bringing it up. And there's a reason for that. Now, while he was living wildly, I guess he was paying for everybody. And part of wild living, I guess, was living expensive. I mean, part of wild living was living on huge expenses. So he runs out of money. And what he did then after that was he tried to look for a job, but there was famine in the land, so there wasn't a lot of jobs, and the only job he could get was feeding the pigs. And again, that probably isn't such a big insult for people in the Western culture, but for a Jewish culture, that was the absolute worst that you can possibly do. Because pigs, to the Jewish culture, is the dirtiest animal out there. It is an abomination. And here he was, not only was he taking care of the pigs, he was starting to eat what the pigs were eating. And in verse 17, it says he came to his senses. And when he came to his senses, he said, even at home, the servants have better food than this. So he says, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. So he prepares this speech. Why don't you just take me on as a servant? And so with this speech in mind, something he practiced, he goes towards home. And this is where the story takes a really weird turn. And again, if the question is, how does God react to people who can't stand him? As the son was coming towards home, he says, well, he was still a long way up, which means the father has been looking and looking and looking. That means that the father had to turn off his TV for a while, that the father had to not go on vacations. I know of someone who wanted to join our church because she really loved the fellowship, but she said, you know what? My son and I ended in really bad terms, and my son, I don't even know where my son is. And she goes, I can go to your church on Saturday, but on Sunday, I need to go back to my church just in case my son comes back. Kind of reminds me of his father. He's like, I can't go on vacation. My son might come back. So you tell me. In this story, what is God portraying as God's feelings towards people who can't stand him? So not only was his father looking, as soon as he sees his son, he runs. And again, this whole thing, I don't know if you've seen old people run. It's not a pretty sight. And in a patriarchal society, they're looking at this and I'm like, he's not supposed to run. But the father couldn't hold his emotions anymore. And I can almost see Jesus losing his voice a little bit, getting a little bit emotional. Because this isn't just a story for him. This is him. He's the Father. And he's known many people who have gone away. He says, I can't stand you, God. And then he's been looking and they started coming back. And he says he couldn't wait for them to get in. He's not going to wait in his chair. He's going to run. And when his son finally got to him, he embraced and kissed him. He couldn't possibly have been smelling good at this point. But that's the thing about fathers who love their kids. They're not kissing them or hugging them because they smell good. They're hugging and kissing them because deep inside are emotions of love that cannot be expressed by high fives and just nodding towards them. It can only be expressed by hugging. And then he starts his speech. Father, I sinned against both heaven and you, and I'm no longer worthy of being called your son. But the father didn't even say, yeah, you're right. You really screwed up. He doesn't even address what he was saying. He interrupts him and says to his servants, he just stops talking to him. He says, quick, bring the finest robe in the house. Whose finest robe is that? The father's robe, right? It says, get a ring on his finger. Whose ring is that? And again, this really stands for a father saying, I don't care what you've done. It doesn't change the fact that you're my son. And then he says, kill the fatted calf. Kill this calf that we're preparing just for this special occasion. And then it says, the party began. And the reason for it is because the son was dead and is now returned to life. He was lost and now is found. So as we start the discussion with everything that Jesus said, we're going to be asking questions, but the main question is, how does Jesus react to people that can't stand him? Go. Turn it on. Now, I want us to get to the mindset of the Pharisees. Why do you think they were complaining about what Jesus was doing? What was it their business? I have a hard time understanding people who are just following a person who's not even part of their crew, and then they criticize him. Why would they do that?
I think in some ways they were just looking for anything accusation to make against Jesus. And the fact that he was doing what good Jews don't do, which is associated with tax collectors, prostitutes, those types of people, I think that got under their skin. Like, what do you think you're doing? That's not what you're supposed to be doing. And I think in many ways they were very exclusive and Jesus was very inclusive. And so I think they were like, what are you doing? They can't join our club. They can't be a part of us. What are you doing? They're hanging around them.
Right?
I would think they would probably feel threatened because he's probably getting a following, and then
Yeah.
he kind of has new ideas, that, wait a minute, this is not what we teach. And so who are you? And he wasn't educated by them.
Right? I think both of you bring up this thing. Maybe they're jealous.
Yeah.
What if they're like, how come he's having fun with them and he's not having fun with us? Right? So again, why do you think Jesus was having fun with them and not with the Pharisees?
I think because Jesus's personality was all inclusive, whereas the Pharisees were exclusive. They wanted a little club. They wanted their own little things. So they kind of maybe thought they were better than all these other people because they were the chosen instead of accepting that Jesus wanted everybody.
Okay, so you think that Jesus was having more fun with sinners because they were more inclusive than people who weren't sinners?
I think he was trying to teach the Pharisees to be inclusive of everyone, that it wasn't an exclusive club. I
Right,
think he was trying to show them, I want everybody, and
Mhm.
please come join us. I think that's why he kept talking to the Pharisees, is he wanted them to come join in on this party for everybody.
And I think maybe it could even be some guilt.
right,
They were Pharisees, they were supposed to be the scribes and the ones who were supposed to be winning souls, and they weren't doing it. And here Jesus is hanging out with these people, seemingly being able to reach into, their lives, and they couldn't do that because they considered them unclean. And so I think in some ways, it's like Cherry said, he was getting a following, and they weren't following him then like they should, but again, I think they might have felt guilty that they weren't doing their jobs that they
Right.
were supposed to be doing.
But you bring up a point that I actually haven't thought about before, which is they're the ones that were pulling away. Jesus was trying to invite them in. It wasn't like Jesus was saying, I can't have fun with you. They're saying, well, we can't have fun with you because you're hanging out with people we don't want to have fun with. Yeah, that's a different take on it. That's good.
I think even when he was younger, when Jesus was 12 and went to the temple, he was already starting to have ideas that don't line up with theirs. And so I think there's always been kind of this, we better watch him because, where is he getting all these things that he's telling all these people? So maybe there has been kind of like that mindset
Right,
from even when he was younger.
right.
Well, and could it be too that they were feeling guilty? I mean, how many of us go through life and we know what we should do? We know what the right thing is, but we do something else. And then when somebody we know is doing what we know is right, then that makes us feel guilty, and we don't necessarily want to hang around with them. But it's not really their fault, but we put it off as being their fault.
Right, right.
I think too that they were afraid they would lose control. He would have all the people coming to him and nobody would be going to them.
Right, right. They were, they were scared that they were losing an audience.
And that's where the jealousy comes in.
Right, right. Now, Jesus talked about 3 different kinds of lost. I don't know if you've ever been lost when it comes to your spiritual walk with God. And if you have, which 3, and the 3 being any one of the sons. We haven't gone to the elder son yet, but do you feel like the sheep? And do you feel like the coin, or do you feel like the son, and why? Which do you relate to the most? Or do you relate to any of them? It's just like, yeah, this parable isn't for me.
I'd say for me, it was the sheep, because just like you said, they just out eating. That's their daily thing. They don't really think about where they are or where they're going. They just keep until all of a sudden they're by, one of them's by themselves. That's kind of what happened to me as I was going through some things in my life. And all of a sudden I came to a crossroads where I'm like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? I'm alone. Which direction do I go? So yeah, I felt like a sheep.
Thank you. Yeah.
I have to say I'm the son.
Mhm.
I feel like I'm the one that grew up knowing it. I went away. And then you come back, you want to live the world, you want to see what it's like, you want to experience it. And then you don't feel worthy. And so it's a challenge through your life to then feel like you are worthy and he really does love you and want to take you back.
Right, right.
I would say the sheep also, just because you just do what you've been taught, not necessarily that it was right, but you're just going along with the herd. You know, and then all of a sudden, you know, maybe an enlightenment or something happens and you just have to go, wait a minute, you know, I don't belong to the herd. I'm different. I need a different path. So in a way, you're still on your own or alone. You
Right.
have to make a choice.
So with either the sheep or the son, how do you answer the question? How does God react to people who might be lost? Either, you know, the way of the coin, the sheep, or the son. What is his attitude towards people who don't even know they're lost, or are like, no, I want to be lost, thank you very much, or I have no idea how this happened, or maybe you're still part of the journey where like, I'm not lost, I'm fine. You know, we don't know whether the next day you're like, oh, okay, now I think I'm lost. Yeah, how would you answer that question? What is this parable is telling us about how God's reaction to people like that?
He doesn't give up on us. He's still there following us, even though we're wandering around, not even knowing that we're lost half the time. I think he's just waiting for that opportunity, or perhaps putting people in our pathway to open up our eyes, but he never leaves us. I think that's what we find out when we finally get to the point of being found. It's such a big rejoice, especially for him, because we finally realized that we were lost and we don't want to be lost.
Right.
I
Well,
think- sorry.
Go ahead.
I think the common word in all three parables is looking. For me,
Right.
that's what stood out for me, because even the dad was out looking far away to see. The woman looked for the coin, lighted a lamp, and the shepherd looked for the sheep. So for me, I think God looks for us and meets us where we are.
Right. Right.
Well, I mean, he was even asked once, why are you here? And he said, I have come to the lost sheep of Israel. I've come because of them. And I think when you think of this whole plan of salvation was thought of even before creation. When you think of, that's a radical plan to sit there, okay, we're gonna come down as a baby, gonna grow up among the humans, probably life threatened many, many times, and then I'm gonna die and for them, stuff like that. It's like, wow, that's quite a plan, you know, and that means that's how much he wants to find the lost. So much that he made this radical plan to come and save us. So it's like, that's how much he cares about the lost.
Right.
I think besides looking, like what Gladys said, is pointing out that he never gave up.
Mhm.
You know, for me, the Father doesn't give up. It doesn't really tell us how many years the son was gone or how long it took the son to use up the money. So he was out there constantly seeking them.
Right. Right. Now, when we look at what the son said, because basically the son said, I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. What would make him say that? You know, what was his mindset of, okay, I'm worthy versus, I guess I'm not. And, you know, how does that fit with people who think they're lost?
Well, he asked his dad, he wanted to go away, and he wanted his half for his inheritance.
So
His dad didn't fight it, he gave it to him. And
So he
squandered
embarrassed
it.
the family, is what you're saying.
Yeah, he abandoned the family.
Right.
He took his money and ran, and then he ran out.
Right.
So he really had no argument about saying, you didn't do anything to help me.
Right.
All I can say is, you give me what I wanted, and I blew it.
Right. Right.
Well, I think the desperation to say, I can't be called your son anymore, is I've gone too far. I've just gone way too far. I've shown where my care was, and it wasn't for my father or anything my father was interested in. So I've gotten into this situation and I've just gone too far. So therefore I can't be your son, but I'd love to be your servant. that's good enough for me, because I know I don't deserve anything else.
Right?
Well, I think it was an awareness that he was unworthy, as Todd was saying, but then he just didn't care if he got, I think it was putting himself on a level, just give me a crumb.
Mhm.
Just give me anything. I just want to be close to you.
Right.
And I think that's what happens when we come to a realization that we're lost with Jesus, is we just want even to touch the hem of his garment. We just want any part of him to be with him.
Right.
Mhm.
It's a desperation of, I just want to be with you.
Yeah, and so if somebody's gonna ask us, hey, I'm not worthy
Mhm.
to be God's son. And I would say, your feeling is valid in a sense, but the God definitely doesn't feel that way. And the parable really brings that out.
Well, I think the fact that you're honest and say, I'm not worthy, it means you are worthy because you woke up.
Right. So, what did you learn in the parable today that you think would change your life for the better? What about this parables really stand out to you and say, you know what? I think I now will be a better person because of what I learned today.
I think we need to keep our eyes open for other lost sheep.
Mhm.
I mean, we've been there and come back and found the Father waiting for us with open arms. And how many other people are out there and have no idea what they're missing out on? So I think just looking for lost sheep is a huge job.
Mhm.
Well, look at all the homeless people in the country. They're lost. But nobody, how many of them actually want to go home?
Hmm.
Maybe they don't have a home.
Mhm.
Maybe they have no family. That's the ones that are tough. It makes it rough on. If you got a family, at least you can go back and try. But some of them won't even do that.
Right. I know for me, I think that it would be a very different church, even be a very different fellowship, if we can call it that, whatever else we do in our own home, if somehow we understood that whether people are lost or non-lost, God doesn't differentiate his love between the two. If anything, what this brings out is that there's a longing that our God has
Mhm.
for people to come home. And we're going to talk about what home means a little bit later, but yeah, I think it would be a good thing if Princeton Seventh-day Adventist Church would be known as people who just accepted people for who they are, not because they agree with what they're saying or they actually even get along. It's because we serve a God who's been looking out there, who's been finding, and his reaction to people who can't stand him is, I love you anyway. Right? Thank you for joining us at our prayer and Bible study session as we journey through the Bible one chapter at a time. We realize that you might have some questions or comments on the things that we discussed today. And if you do, please feel free to fill out the form below. Also, if you would like to have your own Bible, please fill out the form below and we will get back to you as soon as we possibly can. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope to see you next time at our prayer and Bible study session.